Have you ever opened your investment account and stared at the numbers wondering if you are actually moving toward real financial stability? Maybe you managed to save a few $1,000s. Maybe after years of consistent effort, you finally built up 20 or 30,000. But even then, that dream of reaching 1 million feels extremely far away. It almost feels like you are climbing a mountain that never ends. But here is something most people never consider. Once you reach $100,000, you are already far closer to becoming a millionaire than you realize. In fact, you are technically 1/3 of the way there, which sounds strange but becomes very clear once you see the math behind it. I spend an unreasonable amount of time thinking about money, compounding, and why so many people remain stuck living paycheck to paycheck for most of their lives. If you are someone who wants to understand how wealth actually grows instead of just hoping you get lucky someday, make sure to subscribe and tap the like button if this video helps you think differently about your money. Before we jump into the numbers that explain everything, let me show you what most people think wealth building looks like. Most imagine a neat, straight line. They think each dollar saved moves them exactly $1 closer to the final goal. Save 10,000, you are 10,000 closer. Save 50,000, you are 50,000 closer. It is this exact linear thinking that pushes people to quit investing long before they see the real power of compounding. They check their accounts after a few years and think, at this rate, I will be 80 before I ever reach a million. And honestly, if money actually worked in a straight line, they would be right. But that is not how wealth grows. When you invest correctly, your money is not just sitting around. It begins generating returns. Then those returns generate more returns. Then those generate returns. And the cycle repeats. This is not some magical trick or risky get-rich-quick idea. It is simply math that has helped people build wealth for decades, even when their incomes were not high. Yet most people do not understand it or do not trust it. The secret is compound interest. Many people even claim Albert Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world. People who understand compound interest eventually build wealth. People who ignore it spend their whole lives confused about why their money never grows. Let me show you how this works with clear numbers. Imagine you invest $100 every week. That is around $400 a month. Not nothing, but not impossible either. It is roughly the cost of a few dinners out or some random monthly spending habits most people barely notice. Now, assume you earn 8% annually. That is actually a careful estimate since long-term market returns tend to be closer to 10%, but let us stay conservative and stick with 8. Here is where it gets interesting. It takes about 12 years to hit your first $100,000. 12 years feels like forever when you begin, but think about your life 12 years ago. It went by faster than you remember. During these first 12 years, most of your balance comes from your own contributions. Out of that 100,000, around 62,000 comes from the money you put in. The remaining 38,000 is from your returns. Good, but not life-changing yet. Now here is where people make the big mistake. They see these numbers and assume the process is too slow. They stop, they reduce contributions, or they jump into risky investments thinking there has to be a faster way. What they do not realize is that they just completed the most difficult part of the journey. They built the base that everything else depends on. Remember, you are aiming for 1 million. You just hit 100,000. Many assume that means they are 1/10 of the way there, but compounding does not follow that math. You are actually already 1/3 of the way, and the reason becomes obvious as soon as you keep going. Your next milestone is $200,000. And here is the surprising part. It only takes 6 more years to double your 100,000 to 200,000. Let me say that again in different words so it sinks in. You spent 12 years getting to your first 100,000, but it takes only 6 additional years to add another 100,000. Now you are 18 years into your investing journey and sitting at 200,000. At this point, compound interest is finally showing its strength. Out of that 200,000, you personally put in about 94,000. The other 106,000 came purely from investment growth. Your money is now working harder than you are. This is when the snowball starts rolling downhill. And here's the crazy part. Even though you have only reached 200,000, you are actually halfway to a million. Not a tenth, not a quarter, halfway. This is where people first feel the impact of exponential growth. Now prepare for the next stage because this is where the numbers start looking unreal, even though they are completely based on simple arithmetic. Over the next 18 years, you continue the same weekly contributions. Nothing changes. No special strategies. No fancy tricks. At the 36-year mark, you cross $1 million. Your total contributions over all these decades equal about $187,000, but your account shows over 1 million, meaning more than 80% of your wealth came from growth rather than your own money. You are now earning around $80,000 per year from returns alone. Think about that. It took 12 years to save your first $100,000. Now you are generating nearly that much every year without doing anything extra. The compounding is doing the heavy lifting. And the best part is that you did not need to live like a monk or cut everything enjoyable out of your life. Setting aside $100 each week is just about making smarter decisions rather than huge sacrifices. Most people waste more than that without noticing. For example, the average household spends over $600 monthly on food. Reducing that by only 25% frees up more than $150. That is already more than you need for your weekly investing. Or look at transportation. The average car payment in America is now over $700 a month. If someone chooses a reliable used car instead of a brand new one, they can easily save $300 or more monthly. That alone can fund the entire investment plan. This is not about suffering, it is about choosing what your future self deserves. Now let us clear up some doubts people usually raise. First, the 8% return we used is already adjusted for inflation. Historically, stock markets have returned around 10%. We lowered it to stay safe. Second, what about crashes? Yes, markets fall. Sometimes they fall a lot, but that actually helps long-term investors because your weekly contribution buys more shares during downturns. When the market rises again later, those cheap shares multiply your returns. The real danger is when people panic and sell during downturns. That is how wealth is destroyed. Successful investors keep buying even when things look bad. Now let us talk about the mindset shift that happens once your account reaches 100,000. When you see six figures in your investment account for the first time, something inside you changes. The idea of becoming a millionaire stops feeling impossible. It becomes real. Before 100,000, your yearly returns might add a couple $1,000s, but after that milestone, returns can easily bring in 10,000 or more in a single year. In great years, you might see 20,000 or higher. That is the kind of growth people start noticing emotionally. Charlie Munger often said the first 100,000 is the hardest to earn, not because of the math, but because of the discipline and patience required to get there. Once you reach that point, the habits are already built. Another benefit of reaching this stage is opportunity. With savings behind you, you suddenly have the option to take employment risks, start a small business, buy a property, or pursue opportunities that most people cannot because they have no financial cushion. And remember, the numbers we used assume you never increased your contributions, never got a raise, never received any employer retirement match, and never invested any extra lump sums. In real life, most people end up investing much more over time as their lives improve. Most people increase their contributions as their incomes grow. Someone who invests $100 weekly at 25 might invest $300 weekly by 40, and that accelerates the entire timeline dramatically. So here's the final truth. Reaching 100,000 is not just another number. It is proof that you are already 1/3 of the way toward millionaire status. Time and compounding are already working in your favor, but they can only work if you allow them time to do their job. Start today, because decades from now, you will either be grateful you began or regret that you waited.